on this Thursday, August 20th. This is a special meeting of council to discuss a draft bylaw for dogs, the updated dog bylaw. And I will recognize that we are in, sorry, just trying to get things online here. Sorry, bear with me for 1 sec, folks. Okay, sorry about that. And we are in Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are all treaty people. Because this is a special meeting of council, the agenda is set, but I will look for approval of the agenda circulated. Moved by Councillor Jenkins, there's second. Seconded by Councillor Carver, and I will I will make note, Mr. Clerk, that Councillor Merrow has not sent her regrets for this session. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. All those in favor of adopting the agenda as circulated, call it adopted. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Okay, yeah, so the one piece of item that we have is the introduction to the draft bylaw, number 3, on a dog. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to, who's going to lead the presentation? Is it Alex, you're going to lead it? Okay, so I will turn it over to Mr. Wilson. Take it away.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today I am pleased to bring for review a drafted bylaw. And Steve's going to be controlling my slides, so Steve, can you just hit the next one for me? So before we dive in, for those in the room as well as watching at home, the following presentation and further discussion includes discussion of topics related to serious injuries, fatalities, and euthanasia involving dogs. These matters are presented as part of council's consideration of the proposed dog bylaw and may be distressing to some viewers. So before we dive into things, a few things to note. This draft is only for introduction. The draft has not been reviewed by our legal counsel. The draft has been reviewed by SPCA Nova Scotia, and their feedback is reflected in the drafted bylaw. The purpose of today is to receive feedback from council on the current proposed bylaw and direction on some issues, and those will be highlighted at the end and are also highlighted in the staff report. Should this bylaw be passed at a later date, it will not have immediate effect, as we will need the Department of Justice to update our summary offense tickets. That process can be quite lengthy. 8 months to a year is estimations that I've heard. So just something to keep in mind. Anything in this draft bylaw does not impact provincial or federal law, including actions the RCMP or other police agencies may take to protect public safety. This drafted bylaw, is large and encompasses a lot of materials. I've included question breaks in there. Oops, Steve. I included question breaks in there, so please let me know if I'm moving too quickly or if there are any questions. With me as well, we have Director McLeod and Officers Keating and Kuhn that will be able to provide some more expert and first-hand experience than me. So a little bit of background. Currently, the Region of Queens dog bylaw was last modified in 2007. When looking around our jurisdiction throughout the province, and even throughout the local area, this is pretty common. Municipalities are not actively updating their dog bylaws very often. Some are in the 90s that they've last been updated. and some of them even use very out-of-date terms to define dogs. Our current bylaw is 7 pages and 16 clauses, and this drafted bylaw has 52 clauses and is roughly 22 pages in length in its draft form. While the current bylaw certainly has served its function, the bylaw does not allow for the flexibility for situations that are not always black and white, and does not add a number of different things. And I have some comparisons a little bit later in the slide deck, but as well in the staff report that outline that. So to get to why we're here, and I should note for council, I chose to use pictures of happy dogs. That is intentional, and the intent of this is, as we're talking about the dog bylaw, it's important to note that it reflects all dogs. We're not just talking about, dogs that a preconceived notion somebody might have about the type of behavior a dog would have. We're looking at all dogs, all different types of situations. So the motion that brought us here today on October 28th, 2025, council passed a motion, and I'm going to not read this directly, but the gist of it is that they want us to look at our dog bylaw, look at various different provisions, investigate the use of ultrasonic barking deterrent devices, develop some more stringent guidelines on enforcement measures and penalties related to persistent and excessive barking. And that is why we're here today, is going through this process. So quickly on the barking deterrent device. There's been some concern raised around barking deterrent device. I've certainly heard from some folks on it. And while we understand that this is linked to dogs, these devices may impact animals other than just dogs. They could impact people. In my research, I've read about it impacting hearing aids, potentially young children, those sorts of things. And there isn't a whole lot of jurisdictional support to look at regulating these devices at this time. Certainly what recommending at staff at this time is that this is not included in the dog bylaw, but rather, should it be council's wish that we investigate this further, that it be in its own standalone item, because it could have impacts on more than just the canine race, and it also doesn't necessarily fit with the general theme of this bylaw. So is there any questions so far? Okay, we'll carry on. So when looking at the bylaw, we did a jurisdictional scan, and we looked at a number of different places. So City of Toronto, City of Colwood, BC, City of Calgary, the Nova Scotia Municipal Government Act, which you'll see some of the language used later in the bylaw reflects language that's used within the MGA. We engaged with SPCA Nova Scotia, Halifax regional municipalities, as well as several draft bylaws from other Nova Scotia municipalities. I'm not able to disclose those because it's work product that hasn't been presented to their councils yet. In the same way, when we share a drafted bylaw, they're be in the same boat because it's the work product of an individual, not the opinion of a municipality. So, what's wrong with our current bylaw? Well, our current bylaw was written in 2007. And when we talk about lawful entrance, keeping in mind in 2007 I was 8, but in 2007, Amazon home deliveries, Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes, all those types of, more and more people are, as much as people are staying home more and staying secluded, they're having more and more stuff brought to their home. And you're seeing more and more of that, especially, like I said, Amazon. You can get your groceries delivered to your house now. So when we talk about lawful entrance, we're also talking about, it could be our bylaw officers. It could be Nova Scotia Power coming to read the meter. Could be a number of different things. It could be canvassers, as you all would have experienced during election season, knocking on doors. That's another example of a lawful entrance. You're allowed to do that. And currently under our bylaw, it doesn't provide protections for that. So if you think about somebody has their dog tethered out front, and the Amazon driver's instructions are to leave the package on the doorstep, but he's got to walk past the dog, who apparently is possessive of the box, it could lead to a difficult situation. And that's where, you could see a bite incident. You could have that individual feeling nervous, and there are people in the community that are nervous of dogs. For every dog lover, there's which I am, for the record. There's certainly people that are nervous about animals, and everybody in this province has a right to feel safe at work, and that's really what the lawful entrance is, and what we're looking to change. Limited flexibility for our bylaw officers. Certainly, in the new bylaw, there's provisions that will enhance their investigative abilities, and advance to their options in penalties. And we'll get more to that later. Currently, there's no graduated responses, and that's very similar to the penalties portion. There's no formal appeal process. If you think your ruling was unfair, you have to go to court and challenge it in court. There's no internal appeals process before hitting that level, which, when cases go to court, it costs taxpayers, it costs staff time in legal fees, and it's a big expense. Limited owner responsibilities are reactionary and not proactive. So in our current bylaw, if you know that your dog's maybe a little more defensive or aggressive, and you don't do anything about it, under our current bylaw, there's nothing in there that that really changes that. In the new bylaw, or in the new drafted bylaw, sorry, I'm going to say that about 7 times today. In the new drafted bylaw, there are provisions in there for continuing duty and for basically responsible pet ownership. And it's difficult. The current bylaw, it's difficult to manage dogs that are concerning but don't yet meet the threshold for destruction or for euthanasia. And there's no scalable fines in our current bylaw. So, how does the draft bylaw solve those challenges? So, we're looking at behavior-based enforcement. We have a graduated dangerous and fierce framework, and I'll explain more on that in a couple slides down. We have delivery worker protections, orders to comply. We've established the appeals committee. There are now better investigative powers, enhanced owner responsibility, risk-based restrictions, and everything is scalable. So a couple key terms in the bylaw. So we're going to talk about bite incidences. So certainly a bite incident means any incident in which a dog bites or attempts to bite a person or domestic animal, whether or not injury results. So that's a bite incident. That's not giving a designation of anything, but that is what that means. Clear and present danger, that means an immediate and substantial risk of serious bodily harm or death, such that delay would result in injury, including circumstances where safe capture or safe retreat is not reasonably available. Keeping in mind in those situations, we're really looking at the RCMP. We're not looking at our bylaw officers, but we have the protections in there that if our bylaw officers are in a situation, that they can take whatever actions that they need to be safe. Competent person. So this is a new phrase. Competent persons means a person physically capable of controlling a dog, having regard to the dog's size, strength, temperament, and ability to promptly intervene to prevent aggressive behavior. So that's talking about people that are walking their dogs. Are they able to control it? And that's really what that's defining. And then direct supervision is talking about supervising your dog. So is your dog being supervised if you're in the house and your dog's on a lead out in the front of your house? Is that considered supervised? And that's where that's coming into play there. Yeah.
Okay, when we talk about competent person, say if a little girl's taking along a big dog and it's friendly, is that allowable? Because you're saying they're not capable of controlling that dog if something were to happen, or are you saying the dog is okay, so they're okay? I don't know what you mean exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. If I may, really what that's looking at, and keeping in mind our enforcement for the most part is reactionary. It's not proactive. We don't operate from a bylaw perspective. We don't operate in a proactive capacity. They're not out patrolling, that type of thing. So certainly if somebody's walking a dog down the street, little girl's walking her dog down the street, we're not going to be pulling up and handing them a ticket. But it's more or less in the event that something were to happen, because lots of dogs are friendly. My dogs are friendly, but I pulled my dog's tail once and she turned around and snapped me and she wasn't too friendly. So, and then there's all those sorts of mitigating factors. But I think really what the look of that is it's more or less in the if something were to happen. So the dog could be friendly, something could trigger that dog, loud backfires from exhaust is a prime example. I think it's pretty common knowledge that dogs tend to freak out at fireworks. Not all dogs, but a lot of dogs do. So if a car drives by with loud exhaust and it backfires and startles the dog and the dog takes off, throughout the course of throughout the course of their investigation, officers Kuhn and Keating are going to be saying, well, how'd the dog get away? And if the dog's now running at large because it wasn't controlled by somebody that wasn't able to control that dog, then that's where your problem exists. And there's enough measures within the bylaw that doesn't necessarily mean a ticket. That could be education. That could be, I'm going to impose some conditions. These are what these conditions are. So there's more than just we're going to issue little girl a SOT for a couple $100 because something happened. But yeah. Okay, a couple more key terms. So I've already kind of talked about this, but lawful entrant. So really this includes personnel, delivery personnel, postal workers, couriers, utility workers, municipal employees, contractors, emergency responders, and any person lawfully attending a property for lawful business. We talk about secure containment. So secure containment is physical containment sufficient to prevent a dog from leaving the property or contacting members of the public, including could be secured fence, enclosure, building, or another physical barrier, and expressly excludes invisible fence. Foreseeable risk. So where an owner knows or reasonably ought to know that a dog may behave aggressively or pose a heightened risk to lawful entrants or the public, the owner shall implement reasonable measures to manage that risk. And continuing duty as outlined in Part 3 of the drafted bylaw applies whether or not the owner is present and whether or not a delivery or visit is scheduled. And in thinking of that, as I think in a relatable sense for council, is you don't generally schedule canvassing or door knocking activities, but you're allowed to do it. Lawfully, you're allowed to knock on doors. They can, tell you to leave, but you're allowed to knock. So, in that sense, if you're trying to knock on a door and there's a dog tied out front, and the owner's not home, and a dog happened to bite or attempt to bite or something, then that would leave that could, if it was a complaint filed, then that could come back to the owner's responsibility.
What if there's a no trespassing sign posted?
So under the bylaw, signage certainly is not a defense, and that is another change to this bylaw. Signage is not a defense. However, it can be considered. It can be considered throughout the investigation. So, unlawful entrants are not necessarily under no trespassing. A lawful entrant, no trespassing sign doesn't necessarily apply. So you can have a no trespassing sign, but if you have Nova Scotia Power, for example, if you have a Nova Scotia Power, meter on your property, you know, regardless of what signs you have at the gate, they're allowed to come and read your meter. That's a contract that you entered with them, and it's the same thing for if you had a contractor coming to your property. So for those scheduled visits, or loosely scheduled visit, because Nova Scotia Power doesn't say, hey, I'm coming at 3:15 to read your meter, but in those situations, then no, the no trespassing sign is not binding. Okay, so we'll get into the biggest key term, I think, and you can see the black lab's curious as to what they are. So we're going to talk about the difference between a dangerous and a fierce dog. And this language can be a bit confusing, and it's taken directly from the Municipal Government Act, where they define dogs as dangerous or fierce. So under dangerous, we're talking about a bite or attack causing non-serious injury, aggressive behavior, or an attempted bite. These are often managed through conditions, and there's a review that can take place after 12 months with no further incidences. And ultimately the goal there is to reduce risk. So if a dog has been designated dangerous, the goal is about reducing risk and changing behavior. Whereas we get to fierce, this is attack causing serious injury or death of a person or domestic animal. And I want to just veer off that for a second. When we talk about fierce is the top designation. So a fierce dog, if it's a serious injury or death, the pathway could automatically be euthanasia through the RCMP. And under the new process, if it was death or serious injury, the bylaw officer, especially if it was a domestic animal, not necessarily a person, because when we get to people, again, that's when provincial enforcement comes into play, and our bylaw doesn't exactly matter when the RCMP is investigating to that level. So I just want to get out in front of that. But more when you see death there, we're talking about like a domestic animal. It kills my dog kills my neighbor's dog, that type of thing. And certainly the recommendation from our bylaw then is they would recommend to the appeals committee for euthanasia, and the appeals committee would meet and either agree or stay. And I'll talk a little bit more about that appeals committee and that process later and why we chose to include it. Repeated attack, so fierce designation again could be repeated attack or severe unprovoked attacks. So it's really the highest level of restrictions. And they're really only reviewed. We're only looking to review these in exceptional circumstances. Once your dog's designated fierce, there's not going back. You're not going back unless you can really prove that that it was a one-time thing and things have changed, and the burden for that is extremely high. And the goal when designating a dog fierce is to protect the public from extreme risk. So the goal is shifted from we're trying to reduce risk for the public, for the animal, for the owner, to the purpose of designating a dog fierce is to protect the public. Next slide, Steve. So is there any more questions on that?
Thanks, Alex. So I'm assuming that the designations, you're going to walk us through the implications and impact of having a dog designated fierce or dangerous. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Council? Go ahead.
Okay. I'll move on. That's exactly what we're going to do now. So, looking at the restrictions, and what I've done on the chart here is I've labeled some of the different restrictions and what that could be. So when we look at leash control, a dangerous dog, and under dangerous dogs, these are may be imposed. Under fierce dog, it is they will be imposed. So it's a may and a shall in the legislative language. So under leash control, for a dangerous dog, must be under the control of a competent person whenever off the owner's property. Fierce dog, mandatory on that is the same requirements, so the person's got to be competent, but the leash length is limited to 1.5 meters to provide greater physical control. Muzzle requirements, then when it says must, and I apologize that in the language there, when it says must, it's must as if that requirement's put in place. So they just where it says must, and I made this more confusing than it has to be. I'll put my hand up on that. Where it says must, what we're really saying is, should one of our bylaw officers choose to have a muzzle requirement as part of a dangerous dog designation, then the dog must wear a muzzle in public unless specifically exempted by municipal order. Whereas a fierce requirement, permanent muzzle requirements in all public places, unless a veterinary exemption is approved by the municipality. And a veterinary exemption could be from a number of reasons, mainly related to mouth illnesses or damage and stuff like that. Secure containment. So we've talked about this a little bit, but for example, on a dangerous dog could be considered your dog has been at large numerous times, and maybe existed some behavior that made people uncomfortable or scared. So the municipality may require upgraded fencing, locking gates, enclosed runs. So that's like the outdoor fenced-in, like kennel type thing, or indoor confinement when unsupervised. So in that sense, and I think scenario-based is probably the best way to explain some of these. This could be Officer Keating or Officer Kuhn have a situation where a dog, they're going to have to designate it with dangerous because it's gotten out a couple times and, it's chased people or whatever. They could go and say, well, your dog keeps getting out because you got a hole in your fence. So I want you to fix the hole in your fence. That will prevent your dog from getting out. That could be the order to comply that they impose, or it could be, hey, like the leash that you have or the tether that you have for the dog isn't very strong. I want you to upgrade that. Or I want you to upgrade it, but I want you to put it in the backyard because maybe the incident was to do with delivery drivers. Like, those are the type of things that's the tools that they can have instead of saying, okay, here's a $200 or $300 fine. 2 weeks later, okay, here's another $200 or $300 fine. Here's another $200 or $300 fine. Oh, look, you didn't pay your fines. Well, we're going to take your dog, and now it's going to cost the region even more money to house your dog, and you're going to pay us back for that. Or you have to go down other options of adoption, stuff like that. That's not the business we want to get into. If we have to, certainly we can and we will, and we'll have the delegated authority to do that. But what this gives our officers more ability to work with the people that they're responding to. Secure containment under the fierce dog definition is requiring an enhanced containment including locked gates, escape-proof barriers, and enclosed kennel runs designed to prevent escape. And then warning signage. So as we kind of talked about the no trespassing, there's also beware of dog. Warning signage, they may ask you to put a warning sign up to alert visitors or lawful entrants to your property. Under a fierce dog, you're going to have to put a sign up. Next one, Steve. So microchipping. Again, under a dangerous dog, maybe. Under a fierce dog, you must. Training and behavior management. This could be something that the bylaw officers might they might recommend it if it's a dangerous dog, or they might make it as a condition. And if they recommend it, you don't have to do it. Same thing when staff recommends a motion to council, you don't have to do it. But they may require that. And then a fierce dog, same thing. Like you have to do it. There's no ifs and or buts. Restriction on public access. So under a dangerous dog, municipality may prohibit the dog from specified public places or events where necessary for public safety. So you think about some of the larger outdoor events that we have here in Queens. You might say, yeah, you know what, this dog doesn't do well in crowds. It's demonstrated that. It gets nervous around people. It's maybe not great with other dogs. Maybe your dog, maybe let's not take your dog to Privateer Days or Canada Day or any other event on town. Under the fierce dog, it will restrict or prohibit access to designated public places or areas based on that level of risk. Ownership, transfer, and requirements. So if your dog is dangerous, you must notify the municipality that it's moved, transferred, or lost, and that dog cannot be under the control of a minor. When we look at ownership and transfer requirements for a fierce dog, you can't do it unless we give you approval. And the ownership changes remain subject to municipal oversight. So what that could look like, as an example, if if I use this example in our meetings before this, if I had a fierce dog and I said, hey Mike, like I can't afford to keep the dog, I can't afford, and I guess sneak peek to the next slide, we talk about liability insurance. I can't afford the liability insurance. Mike, do you think you could take my dog for me? And Mike says, sure, I'll take your dog. Then I have to come to the municipality. Brenda or Chris will come out and look at my property, Mike's property, and say, yep, you know what? All the conditions that we placed on Alex as an owner, Mike can meet those conditions. We're okay with this transfer. So that's what that looks like. Or in the vice versa, they could say, Mike, you got holes all over your fence. Like, no, you can't, or whatever that might be, right? So it gives us the approval authority to move the dog. Obviously, if you move houses, you still got to let us know that you're moving, but we can't take your dog from you because you moved homes. Yep.
For being part of the dog park up in Milton, would we ever be able to get access if you fellows put them on a list? Because we wouldn't want to see somebody come up with a dangerous or fierce dog and if they were part of our, because the only way they can get in is because it's locked anyway. But if we don't know it, and all of a sudden they become members and they put the dog in with somebody else, that we would be able to understand that. Is that possible?
And just for clarification, Councillor Fancy, is that private? Is that privately owned?
It's a group owned, and but they have to pay membership every year. So if at least we'd know if that was on that list, that we wouldn't want them to be in there with other dogs.
That'd be certainly something I'd have to take back to legal. There'd be questions there around data sharing, which, as a municipality, we're restricted to do. And I think, when we talked about bylaw 26, the private road levy, that was something that came up at that point. So I don't want to say yes or no and give you the wrong answer, but I'll take note of that certainly and put that as part of as legal reviews. That's certainly something that would consider for that.
And just following your reasoning there, Mr. Wilson, so presumably if it was a publicly owned park, municipally or provincially owned park, then we'd have more latitude in terms of restricting or prohibiting the dog, a fierce dog accessing those spaces. But it's a little bit trickier when it's privately held or community-based organization owned facility or space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So when we're looking at restrictions of public access, we can, and again, that's where you kind of have to in some way trust the owner of the animal, because we're not, our bylaw isn't going to be patrolling, Pine Grove Park, for an example, and looking to see, you got your dog tags on. Is your dog listed under, does it have restrictions, those sorts of things? Certainly that's not something that's going to be taking place, but it comes down to a complaint driven process. And as you can see kind of at the end of the bylaw, when we go to the fees, the fines for contravening the bylaw when your dog is designated are significant. Right now under our current bylaw, and I believe that's Appendix A on the drafted bylaw, those are our current fines. There isn't a fine that goes over $237. Under the new bylaw, there are fines that are lower for first offenses, but when you have this designation and you contravene it, the fines are quite significant, and including up to a fine total of up to $10,000. Not for this particular violation, but in general. So we definitely looked at the fining matrix, and the one thing I put the asterisk next to it, the fining matrix, is that it has to go through DOJ. The numbers won't end in zero. They never end in zero with DOJ, but so those will have to be approved by DOJ when we go to the summary offense ticket process. Thank you. Okay. Back to the restrictions. We're looking at supervision requirements. So under dangerous dog, there's no additional supervision requirements beyond the imposed conditions. Fierce dog may not be left outdoors unsupervised, and the owner must maintain a documented plan for safely interacting with delivery personnel, utility workers, emergency responders, and other lawful entrants. So again, that's getting back to that lawful entrant thing is really something that's a key factor in this bylaw of talking about people that are allowed on your property.
Thank you. Just looking for clarification. So it mentioned earlier about the leash control, and then I guess it is related to this with the supervision requirement. So if you have a dangerous dog, it says it has to be leashed at all times if it's off the owner's property. But we're also saying that if you have a known dangerous dog, it could be left outside unattended. I'm just looking for clarification on that specifically. Like if you have a dangerous dog, it's noted, your yard's not fenced, they may be on a lead, they may not be on a lead, just looking for clarification about that specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this kind of ties in, viewing this as a supplementary to the other restrictions on this, I think is important. So when we're talking about no additional supervisions requirements beyond the imposed conditions, so those imposed conditions, so if, for the example you provided where there's no fence, and leashing and tethering under the bylaw are kind of two different things. Leashing is physically I'm holding the leash, walking my dog. Tethering is you tied a rope or you hooked it up to a tree or your deck or something like that, and you've tethered your dog to put your dog out. So in the supervision requirements, we're certainly looking at, that in that condition, it could be okay, you can leave your dog outside and, be in the house, but you gotta tie it out back, those type of conditions. So there's the supervised requirements. So really, I would look at it more from the fierce dog. Is what we're really meaning by this is if 10 o'clock at night you have to let your dog out to do their business in February. Under a fierce dog, you're under the bylaw, you would have to stand out there with your dog. Under a dangerous dog, you would not have to stand outside and physically be supervising the animal. And that's kind of the difference between the two. Is a dangerous dog, the dangerous dog designation is like a level 1. Fierce dog is really a level 2 in terms of your scale of severity. So kind of moving down, we look at insurance. So a dangerous dog, there's no insurance requirement. Under a fierce dog, the owner must maintain at least $1 million in liability insurance and provide proof annually to the municipality. The municipality must also be notified immediately if the policy is canceled, expires, or materially changes. And those insurance policies are available through a number of different organizations. Pet insurance there's increased levels of pet insurance. Then additional conditions. So when we're talking about the dangerous dog, the conditions are tailored to the specific level of risk presented by the dog, with the municipality considering the least intrusive measures that adequately protects public safety. Under a fierce dog, may impose any additional reasonable conditions necessary to address the elevated risk posed by the dog. And I think when we're looking at the two, it's like I said, to the dangerous and the fierce dog, it's really important that when we're thinking about the two dogs, it's the dangerous dog did something bad once or twice. A fierce dog has done it and is likely going to do it again. And that's the difference between the designations. Steve? Oh, are there any questions so far?
Yeah, just with respect to the insurance requirement for a fierce dog designation, so that is above and beyond third-party liability that you would have on a property insurance, presumably because this is about having third-party liability when that dog is anywhere in the world, not just on your own property. So it's separate and apart or above and beyond what most people would maintain as property insurance. That's right. Thanks. Any other questions, Council? At this stage? Carry on.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the appeals committee. So what the appeals committee does is it really, and the general theme of it is it really kind of the sober second thought is one way to look at it. It provides a neutral, as neutral as it can get, appeal process for residents, whether it be, and it's only really on serious cases, so we're looking at orders to comply. So those are kind of all those restrictions that we just went through. The dangerous dog and fierce dog designations, license conditions, suspensions, revocations, refusals, decisions relating to redemption conditions where it's materially disputed. And the appeal committee shall review and determine any recommendation by the bylaw officer for euthanasia of a dog. A couple other important things to mention on the appeals committee. So the appeals committee is proposed to be composed, that's a tongue twister, of 2 staff members and 1 counselor. We had talked about making it members of the public. The concern with doing that is exposing a member of the public to the heightened situation that these could cause. And kind of breaking it a little bit further than what I have written there on the slide, with the staff member cannot be directly or work directly with the bylaw officers. So pretty well any member of the land use department is out. Cannot be Director McLeod, cannot be CAO Thorpe, or Deputy CAO Hurdle. It can't be anybody in a position of authority over those individuals. They need to be neutral staff members to be a part of that, and then one counselor who would chair that committee. And there's some language in there, and I'm happy to dive in further if council wishes, but there's some language in there like a 3-day call out for that committee, because it's not going to meet regularly. That committee's only going to meet in circumstantially meet. And what that appeals committee's job is really to look at what's the process followed. Did the bylaw officers follow the correct processes? Does the evidence add up? It's not a judge jury type thing. It is, the appeal is saying that this isn't fair, this wasn't done right. And then the appeals committee looks at the process and says, well, no, the bylaw officers did follow the process correctly, or no, you know what, we don't agree with this recommendation based off of the evidence presented, or this or that, and we're not going to we're going to not do that. And what that does is it delegates the decision making on euthanizing an animal off of one individual. Those decision makings, granted, I haven't been in a position that I've had to do it, but having talked to a number of people who have, both in our municipality as well as outside, it certainly can be a very tough decision, and not something that people want to make. And different municipalities do it differently. Some municipalities, CAO makes the final decision. Some, it's whoever is directly supervising the bylaw. Municipalities with police forces, it could come down to the police chief. So every jurisdiction does this a little bit differently. Some, it's the bylaw officer has the first and final say, and there's no kind of second thought process there. The other thing behind the appeals committee is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is it does potentially limit legal expenditures. And in that process, if somebody appeals something and they successfully get their appeal, they're probably not going to then go to court to further appeal it, because it's already been appealed. So it adds a second step before going to court on that process.
Is this, if this committee happened, is it open to the public?
Yes, yeah, it'll be open to the public, and same with all committees of council. If forms, it'll be beholden to the same processes as the MGA. To be able to go in camera if they need to. But all motions and all decisions must be made publicly.
And so I just see that the last bullet here is that the appeal committee shall review and determine any recommendation for euthanasia. So are all the other, the appeals committee is only enacted if an appealant comes forward and challenges the decision, but is immediately or automatically convened in the case of a recommendation to euthanize a dog, irrespective if the dog owner or an impacted party appeals it. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, and every other decision and every other fine that's levied by our bylaw, or any other designation or decision that's made by our bylaw officers, aside from euthanasia, that is on an appeals base only. In the event of euthanasia, the bylaw officer under the new bylaw, or under the proposed drafted bylaw, would not have the authority to order euthanasia. It would have to go to the appeals committee. However, as I mentioned earlier, except for in the scenario of protecting public safety, but again, that's where we get outside of our bylaw officer's role versus our CMP or other policing agencies. Okay, Steve. Thank you. So implementation. So I guess we're coming to the end on my PowerPoint here. So on implementation, so kind of what this process is going to look like is staff will take feedback from council and implement that feedback into the draft. The draft will be reviewed by legal. Staff will contact the provincial government to receive an estimated wait time for summary offense ticket updates, and staff will update the date that the bylaw will take effect along the lines of the estimated wait time. So on the bottom of any policy or bylaw that's ever been presented, it's effective on X date. Once we get that estimated time, we'll put a little barrier in there, and that's what will be presented to council for an effective date. Once reviewed, myself, Director McLeod, our bylaw officers will return to council for a formal first reading of the bylaw, should it be council's wish to proceed. And then should council pass this bylaw through first and second reading, once it's through second reading, we'll apply to DOJ to update our summary offense tickets and have this go to municipal affairs. The current version of bylaw 3 will remain in place until the new version comes into force. Steve. And so that leaves me with questions for council. So there are a number here, and Mr. Mayor, I'd leave this up to you if you want to take some time to ask questions of myself or my colleagues here, or before we get into these questions, or do you want to go one by one? That's up to you. What do you
Thanks, Mr. Wilson. Well, I want to thank all members of our staff who contributed their time and efforts in pulling this together. I've already received a fair amount of feedback, and I know other members of council have as well, just applauding how thorough and thoughtful the drafting of the bylaw for consideration has been. So I thank you all for that. And I just want to highlight too, just in terms of the implementation timeline, clearly there's a lot to digest here, and I'm sure there's members of council who have some strong opinions about some things, but also wanting to leave space and time for us to digest this, and clearly some of this stuff is going to percolate throughout the community, and we're going to, I'm sure, and for all those who are assembled here, and for those watching along at home or watching the archive version of this meeting, I'd encourage you to reach out to your counselor and provide them any feedback that you feel strongly that they should understand, or any perspectives that you feel are important for us to understand, so that we can represent that in formulating the bylaw. We try to get it as close to right as we can before we send it for legal review, because it's just an arduous and resource-intensive process to continue to substantively change the thing, whereby we think we got it close, we send it for legal review, and then it comes back, and then it comes forward for first reading, and then at that time, of course, we can still identify course corrections. It delays things and costs, and it becomes more resource intensive as we try to modify the thing substantively at the later phases. So I really appreciate this approach of bringing forward the kind of early intentional and very well thought out draft, but bringing it forward now so that the council and members of the community have an opportunity to understand what it says. And I greatly appreciate the approach to the presentation today, because I think it did a great job of framing what it says and what it doesn't, and how it differs from the existing bylaw. And I'm not sure in terms of a timeline what folks think would make sense in terms of trying to in terms of capturing that feedback from our residents, and council providing that feedback to staff in terms of elements that they'd like to see reflected or perhaps modified or shifted a bit in the approach to the bylaw. What do you folks think would be reasonable in terms of when we want to sort of how big of a net we want to cast here, and how open for that first sort of round of substantive feedback and getting that to staff before they make whatever modifications seem appropriate to the bylaw before it gets sent up to legal? I'm not sure what people think about that. What's a reasonable time frame to allow for that initial feedback to flow in? Thoughts, council? Is it like a 2-week period, or any thoughts on that?
In my opinion, like, I had a few residents contact me about this, and then after they actually sat down and read through it, they also contacted me back and thought it was a well thought out document. And I don't think it's something that we need to delay very long. I would think 2 weeks would be the tops.
Okay.
It's anybody who's probably wants to make an opinion or say something has already said it or will very shortly.
Yeah, I'm just cognizant of the fact of the time of year. Some people aren't as engaged; they're away on vacation and whatnot. Who may have, but I agree. I mean, and I know several members of council have also, probably for people who are very motivated and impacted, either dog owners or people who are very fearful of dogs, have provided us with feedback already. Deputy Mayor.
I'm just thinking, I'm not sure if staff were preparing for this to come forward on September the 8th or not, but I guess, in my opinion, if it did come forward on September 8th, and we would have from now until then to receive feedback, and then also, when we put it out for first reading, I know that there's certain timelines that you have to meet before you can put it out for the second reading, but there's nothing saying that we can't have that in between time a little bit longer if we felt like we needed it, I think. So I'm just looking for clarification on that, because I do think that if we put it out for first reading on September 8th and we had, you know, all kinds of feedback come back and we weren't really sure, you know, if we were ready for second reading, we could workshop this again potentially.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate the enthusiasm, Deputy Mayor, and I appreciate the comments as well. You know, and I want to, you know, thank Mike, Brenda, and Chris, as well as colleagues on the municipalities for helping bring this together. You know, it's a very, very large document. I started working on this probably March, I would say, and then we had some other competing priorities that bumped it and then bumped it back and all those sorts of things.
So it's not going to be ready for first reading.
It's
on
definitely not
September
going to be
8th.
ready for reading. No. The legal review period, I think
Yeah.
we need to leave a month. Generally speaking, I think we need to leave at least a month for a legal review period, because of the complexity and the density of it. I would, and I wouldn't want to commit to a date for sure, but I would expect probably November. Certainly, if council says no, like we need this back in October, we'll do as council wishes. But for a proper legal review, I think we need at least a month once we receive the feedback from staff, or sorry, from council. Jeez, once you receive the feedback from council and their constituents. I think we probably need a couple weeks for staff to implement that and then contact legal. So I think if looking at staff's preference, I think, and I'm not seeing head shake, so I would think probably November would probably be the timeline I'd be looking to come back with this. And of course, recognizing that with the DOJ, hopefully we can. We'll send them a box of cookies every month that it sits and hope that they can bump it up in the timeline. But that would
Dog
be
biscuits, eh? Well, it's been since 2007 since it's been, so we get it right rather than right away. But does that make sense to council? Does 2 weeks feel okay in terms of making that commitment to capturing feedback from your residents and then relaying that along to staff? Not shutting down any feedback you want to provide at this point, but just in terms of just recognizing that it is likely that you will receive feedback that would be important to relay or pass along. Yeah.
And Mr. Mayor, to that effect, and should it be council's wish, what we certainly could do, rather than asking the questions of council today, is we could come back for a feedback report in another meeting of council. And the questions that I have for council today, if it's the desire, if you guys want to provide some initial feedback today, that would be great. But if you want to take those questions back to your communities and ask your residents that too, then we can come back to council for a shorter meeting to certainly look at how residents feel about the questions that we have for council. That could be a process method as well.
So, yeah, so I'm thinking maybe both and, where we provide an opportunity today for members of council who do have, would like to discuss their input that they prepared for today. But then also, after that two-week period expires and we take stock of the type of feedback that we have, and if there is good reason to have further discussion at a public meeting to figure out what the direction of council is with respect to the substance of the bylaw. Does that make sense from CAO Thorpe? Does that make sense to you just as a process perspective, a sequence?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay, sounds good. Does that sound good to you, council? All good with that? Okay. All right, then do we want to just go back to that slide then with some of those key questions for consideration here? And I'll welcome council to, if there's one that you feel strongly about that you'd like to interject here, or if there's something else that you'd like to provide or bring forward for discussion, I'd invite that now. Go ahead, Councilor Wenzel, I recognize you now.
Yeah, I don't need the question. There's two things here that I wanted to at least bring up. And the one is the actual dog owner themselves when we're thinking about this bylaw, because something I see, and a lot of people have mentioned this to me too, is those people that have a dog, and probably shouldn't, and tie their dog outside, and that's the dog's life, a 6-foot rope or a 6-foot chain, and that's their life. And you wonder why you hear howling and barking all the time. And it's one thing to say, yes, we need to keep our dogs contained, but then there's another of, I don't know if that's an SPCA and neglect thing or whatever, but I think you should take that in consideration with writing your bylaw. And the other issue I would have would be with ownership, to take in consideration that there are folks, and I've been part of this too, that actually don't own a dog. They're a breeder. So you're like a foster home. So they're there until it's time to breed them and have their puppies, or they're a stud. So something you should take in consideration. I mean, they should still have to follow the bylaws of having that dog in their home outside of registration and all that. So it's just comments, not really questions.
Absolutely, and those are excellent points, Councillor Wenzel. I think to start on the latter, under the language that is used in the bylaw, we use the term, and during the presentation, I more than likely said owner instead of the full sentence of owner and guardian. So under the bylaw, we define owner or guardian as kind of the same thing. So so from a foster lens, that's certainly important. And then for the first part, sorry, can you repeat the first part for me? Oh yeah. Sorry. I had a brain. Yeah. So certainly under the animal cruelty, and I invite and the special constables, bylaw officers to step forward if they have anything additional. But certainly under the animal cruelty, the SPCA is the province is a governing body under that. And kind of like when we talk about the ultrasonic and the misuse of the ultrasonic, that too, kind of anything that deals into the animal cruelty lens, certainly, that certainly is an SPCA thing. But I don't know, Brenda, if you have anything more to add to that.
I don't have anything else to add. We currently don't investigate animal welfare cases. So if you want that to be added, then I guess that would be something that we would take under consideration.
Well, I'm thinking out loud, right? So there's a dog in the neighborhood that continuously barks and howls all the time. And you want to blame the dog, or you want to, complain that the bylaw is not covering it, and it's really not the dog's fault. The dog is tied to a tether, got 8 feet, and that's his life. They walk out and they give him some food. Don't matter the temperature, don't matter the weather. And I can specify a few places that's where it's done, So I don't know how you capture that in a bylaw. Director McLeod, I don't know how you would capture that, but when you're thinking that well, maybe we're going to find this person because of the noise or whatever. I mean, maybe when you go in to present that person with a fine, you maybe have a look around and kind of understand the reason why the dog's acting the way it's acting.
Of course, when we do get barking complaints or other dog complaints like that, we do sort of make sure that we are looking around, that we're investigating the site outside. They have shelter, they have food. We ask questions, so that is part of the investigation.
So I'm just wondering from a jurisdictional perspective, though, do we have like I was just thinking, because Mr. Wilson, you had said that, I mean, the animal cruelty, animal welfare domain largely falls in the provincial enforcement sort of jurisdictional landscape. So I'm wondering, do we have, like, if we become aware, if our bylaw officers become aware of an incident where there is a likelihood or observation of animal wellness or animal cruelty, unwellness, to like a duty to report up to the other authorities, or what is that? I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, so certainly under the bylaw, we definitely could include that provision. It's not something that's included. I think that that's a general practice in general. We could definitely include language that, just kind of spitballing here. But I think, we definitely could include language that states that, evidence uncovered during an investigation may be forwarded to other jurisdictions. I think the council gets the gist of my thought process.
Yeah, and I'm not even suggesting that necessarily we need to codify it like within the bylaw. Just in terms of like the principal duality, though, if it's already captured, if animal cruelty and animal wellness standards already exist within the criminal code, and are enforceable by the RCMP or by SPCA or other authorities, then I don't think it serves us well to create. To duplicate or create bylaws at the local level that may contravene or interact awkwardly with already existing authorities or jurisdictions. I just have an incomplete understanding of that landscape.
Yeah, no, and I would agree, Mr. Mayor. I think that we certainly have to, when crafting this, it's certainly something that is taken into serious consideration was, okay, well, what's the RCMP's obligation? What's, policing obligations on these matters? And I think how it's currently written, where we stay out of the animal abuse lens, I think is the best course for now under the bylaw. The province, things change with the province. The authority gets delegated sometimes in the province. The upcoming legislature is sitting. HRM is on record. It's in media asking for a dangerous dog designation throughout the province. So that it's like a registry, basically. So there's, will that happen? Who knows? I guess watch Ledge TV and find out. But so I wouldn't want to wade into the enforcement of animal cruelty at this time. I think that currently, as prepared, I think the bylaw certainly speaks to an enhanced version of what is within our purview. Animal cruelty, I think we, where it does happen is very, sad. And I think that in some cases we will have overlap. I think that's the, and I think if you talk with, certainly councils with municipal police forces, like, Town of Bridgewater or Amherst or Truro, there's going to be overlap between bylaw enforcement and policing activity. These situations, there could be overlap, and certainly under the MGA, we have to step aside to the higher authority, which in this case would be the province under animal abuse. So I think it's good practice, and I trust our bylaw does that today. If they know of a situation, they report it upwards, and certainly there's always room for improvement on enforcement from the provincial side on animal cruelty, but I think that that's a process. I don't necessarily think we need to define it. One easy way, as I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, was we could look at defining a process that any evidence obtained gets passed through. That's something we could add. It's easy language. I don't think there would be any legal ramifications of that, but not a lawyer, so that's what we do legal for. But I think that that's something that could ease residents and council and staff's mind, certainly.
I don't really want to further this, but the one thing that Councillor Winslow has brought up here, I've been, in my 14 years of council, I've been into two situations where they haven't been dogs, but have been other animals that I thought were into very bad situations, but they had some kind of a covering they could get under. But it was mud and it was awful. And 2 times I called, nothing happened, because they had a shelter, and they had so if you had a dog that had a place that they could, a little, a shed could go in or something, they probably, that not unless there was something different than what I've had. I always thought even if we could be able to lend a voice of some sort saying we don't think this is because they are there now. So we're saying we aren't going to do anything because they are there now. We're not, that situation's still going to stay the same. So if any kind of voice we could put forward to help, I think it would be a help.
The only thing that I've heard from a few residents out home was that they'd like to see if we can allow for dog owners to pay once for the lifetime of their dog. And they'd need a microchip, right? And I'm not sure what that costs, so.
That was feedback that we've heard, and while we were drafting this, I was contacted by another member of council asking if we were going to be including that. The short answer of why it's not currently in the bylaw is maintaining, I guess, census seasons this year for residents, and our only way to maintain a census is by dog tags. You could put an arbitrary number to how long a dog may live, but I knew a guy who had a 24-year-old golden retriever, so it's I think your arbitrary number of, if you said 10 years, which I think I Googled it at some point, I'm pretty sure the average lifespan was 10 years between all breeds. So in that case where the guy had a 24-year-old golden retriever, that would be 2 dog licenses. And it's not really about the income side of it from our end. I have a dog license, and Director McLeod can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the dog tag is like $10. It's not a income generator, but when you register your dog, is it allows us to have an accurate census of what dogs are in the community and where they are and how many we have. And so when we're looking at a number of even things from looking at installing bags for dog pickup in public spaces and ordering bags, we're taking into account how many dogs we have. So there's that's the primary reason, is to have that census of, okay, well, if we have a lifetime membership or a lifetime license for per animal, and the dog dies, unfortunately the dog dies at like 3. Well, they're also then paying, and we haven't talked about numbers, but let's just say we charged $100 for a lifetime license. If that person's dog, passed away at 2 or 3 years old, then they overpaid by $70. So then are we gonna have a process where if your dog dies before its life expectancy, people come back? And that's where you kind of get into the weeds on that, right? So the annual registration kind of helps us keep a census, gives us a database of the number of animals that we have and the number of dogs that we have in the county.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Wilson. That makes sense. Councillor Carver, I'm just, is your sense that the interest in a lifetime tag is related to the inconvenience of like just given that you're representing North Queens, do folks have to come down here to the administrative building or is they able to do it online? Oh, okay, they are. Okay. Okay. Other thoughts in general, other feedback in general, members of council would like to bring forward at this time? Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I was contacted by someone who trains dogs, and just curious of some different processes. I'm just wondering, when we're dealing with aggressive dogs, dangerous dogs, fierce dogs, whatever the term may be, are we utilizing someone who specializes in canine behavior? Not trying to discredit what you folks do. I'm just wondering, like, there are designated folks who do that, and I may be unaware of some of the training that you have, and perhaps you have it, but just trying to get an understanding as residents are asking, especially going forward with this draft bylaw the way that it is. There's a lot of educational components and a lot of things that are proactive instead of reactive. But if you're dealing with an aggressive dog, is there someone else that you might lean on to assess that dog's behavior? Do we only deal with that in-house?
To date, we really haven't had any, I can only, like, off the record, recommend training. In the new proposed bylaw, then that would give us conditions where we could say you need to have training because the dog is labeled dangerous or fierce. Currently, so no, we just rely on our own assessment, but that's part of the gap that we can fill if the new bylaw is enacted. It would give us that other measure where we could contact a trainer or a behavior and have the behavior of the dog assessed.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is it okay if I continue?
Go ahead.
The other concern that has come up regarding the 2-meter leash requirement. So in this case, it was articulated to me that there's certain circumstances where longer lead lines would be more appropriate. A specific that was shared was at the beach. So in the event that that's really not, they're feeling like, you know, that I think it would be like 6.5 feet would be restricted. There's a concern there that if they can't have them on a longer lead, that it might actually encourage people to not put them on the lead in the first place. So I just wanted to share that as that's come through. This particular person, it's my understanding, works with ground search and rescue, and the leads that they use are 30 feet. And I just, in going through the draft bylaw, I couldn't find anything that referenced potential like exceptions with trainers or anything like that. So I just wanted to flag that as that feedback has come back. Maybe there just needs to be some language in there that, you know, if it was for specific things that would be relevant for trainers or like ground search and rescue things. I think those would probably just be exempt anyways, but maybe the language could be there. And then this person has also just flagged, and mostly is curious that as we're, you know, enhancing this, will we have an emergency line that residents would be able to call if there was a dangerous dog on the loose, because that has been something that has come up many times that I've experienced over the years. Just I had a couple dogs that ended up in my yard. They didn't appear to be dangerous, but you know, they weren't tagged. They didn't have a collar, and it's hard to potentially get someone available. So as we're aware that there will be, unfortunately, we'll experience at times dangerous dogs in the community or fierce dogs. If that dog is on the loose, are we going to have an emergency line that our residents are going to know and be aware of, and how do they get you folks on the line so that we're not potentially encouraging residents to try to catch a dog that may be dangerous.
After hours, it's the RCMP. During business hours, currently it's just our office number. I haven't had any communication or talks regarding a hotline or a emergency line. The RCMP are the overriding force after hours. And if it's really a dangerous or fierce dog, we would be calling the RCMP also, if it was during business hours, for help, if required.
Okay, maybe that's a broader conversation for another day. I think it just highlights, yeah, that some people just have a hard time navigating that. And then I think the last feedback I got was just some questions around what's the current process on if we are like holding dogs or rehoming dogs, and we have very limited space. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of help us understand that a little bit. And if that information has to come back later at a later date, that's totally okay. Thank you.
So currently, we obviously, if we do capture a dog, we try to reunite with the owner. It's not really to be punitive, although if we, under certain circumstances that may come up, we would try to obviously blast Facebook like we do now and try to reunite the owner. Otherwise, we are responsible until we can find the owner, find a rescue organization to take the dog, and on. Maybe it has to come down to adoption, but we haven't had very many cases of that. Usually, if we do get a dog, we can reunite it fairly quickly. They're calling, "Have you got my dog?" So far, we really haven't had that much issue with the question that you asked.
Thank you. And I do have one more question, just thinking about from different perspectives here. I know staff aren't suggesting that we propose a limit on how many dogs someone has, and I can certainly understand why they're not proposing that. Just curious, from like a breeding perspective, there are people concerned about like maybe some different scenarios where breeders aren't perhaps reputable or fostering a safe environment for dogs. And so I'm just wondering, I think if I'm on the right track, this likely would tie to what Mr. Wilson has said earlier about the provincial side of like animal cruelty. I just want to clarify that it's not something that we would ever be able to put in a bylaw like this, I would assume. Just looking for clarification. Might not be from you, Ms. Keating. I'm not sure who it is, but I just wanted to ask.
I'll send that one over to Alex.
Daily double. So yeah, I guess in short, and I certainly saw some of the questions or concerns about that online. When you get into kind of like the puppy mill situation type thing, which I think was some of the direct comments. When you get into that situation, certainly you're looking at animal abuse, which comes into the policing sector. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but we certainly have restrictions under the land use bylaw as well for certain businesses operating in certain areas, that type of thing. So we don't have, the current bylaw. The current version of the bylaw. There's some provisions around kennels. Kind of in early days in talking about this, we kind of decided that it kind of duplicates with the land use bylaw. So that was certainly taking that portion out. And I think again, really, it leads down to animal abuse. In cases of animal abuse, in cases where they're operating unethically. Then again, I think that ultimately, I don't like to sound like passing the buck, but ultimately that comes down to the province's enforcement jurisdiction through SPCA, RCMP, or other means.
Any other input? Go ahead, Councillor Fancy.
I just got a couple different things here. I know one thing Ed, with a resident back here probably 6 months ago, where the dog was next door was for some reason wanted to come over to their property and dig holes I don't know if it smelled better or whatever it may be, but it would come over and dig holes and then go back their place. And of course, she tried to report it and things, and it just, nothing ever got done. Is there anything that can be done there to, say, if it's destroying somebody's property or something?
So certainly, if in that scenario, assuming that the dog wasn't tethered, then technically speaking, that dog would be considered at large, and at large is and before diving into this again, I just want to emphasize that really we're at a reactive level with this bylaw. We're not proactive. I know as a kid, my dogs would run over to the neighbor's house. We lived on Wharf Rock Road. Anthony McDermott always had dog treats for my dogs, so they would run over and get in that type of thing, and like it was fine. And we sold our house, they might not be. So, I think in that particular type of situation, the dog will be at large. I would encourage the resident, and currently under a current bylaw, it would still be at large. So I would encourage that resident to certainly report that to our bylaw officers, that this is continuing to happen. The dog is continuing to get out and it's continuing to be at large. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's, under the under the drafted bylaw, it certainly doesn't mean it would become dangerous immediately, but then, that gives our opportunity to our bylaw officers to talk to the owners. And Brenda, if you have anything to add other than that, we give some time to talk to them, and there could be a fine, it could be education, that type of things.
Yeah, I think in that case, I think the dog was digging underneath their fence and coming over and doing it because you. But the other one we were talking about earlier on was the barking deterrent devices, and you said that they cannot be enforced or be able to do, because the barking is probably one of the biggest things we have. People just complain that my dogs are barking all hours of the night, and what am I going to do? And how are we going to deal with that?
So, in particular to the barking deterrent devices, so whether them being used, so it puts it into a difficult to really come up with a fulsome answer on that, because there's not a whole lot of Canadian-based studies done on the viability of them. If it's, as we've kind of outlined, if we're looking at animal cruelty lens, that's provincial authority. If we're looking at it from a people using them and misusing them, then we're looking at it from a different lens. But in conversation with the SPCA, certainly they don't endorse the use of them. In conversations or in researching around the devices, certainly on online forums, nothing that really would meet the threshold that I would want to bring to the council, because it's not peer reviewed or anything like that. But certainly there's concern around the devices. I think it's staff recommendation at this time that they're not included in a dog bylaw, but that there could be further research done, and if it's council's will, we can continue to do further research and try to get in touch with some specialists on that, and come back to council with recommendations on how to address the use or the misuse of these devices.
So I'm not just saying about the devices, I'm just saying, what do we have in place that we can help stop this barking, because as people have a lot of complaints about that.
The owner needs to put the dog in the house. That's pretty simple.
Yeah, so currently under the nuance barking, so we there are some provisions within the bylaw for that. At the very bottom of the bylaw. Under Appendix B, we have a nuanced barking fine scale. So currently under our bylaw for nuance barking, so it's defined as owning dog that persistently disturbs neighborhood quiet by barking, howling, or otherwise. Under the current bylaw, there's a single fine of $237.50. Under the proposed bylaw, which the fine table is Appendix B, that is defined as nuanced barking. So your first fine is $200, your second fine is $400, your third plus fine is $600. So there's an increased scale there. And first offenses expire after 24 months. So if you don't get a fine for 24 months, it goes away, and a warning doesn't constitute an offense. So just to clarify those. So we've added a gradual increase to the fining levels to help deter that, because otherwise it's one fine at the same price level. So it gets more and more expensive if owners do not deter that.
And again, and all of those suggested fine amounts are subject to approval by the province, right, by the DOJ. Yeah. Okay, maybe if we could just pull up the key questions there, just quickly to see if council has any particular input on, and I know just off the top of my head, some of the, about maximum number of animals, about extending it beyond dogs to include other domesticated animals as to be captured within the scope of the bylaw. And then I think there was restricted areas, creating restricted areas. I'm not sure if any input from council on any of those sort of those domains. So an age restriction, so minimum age presumably for the guardian, not the animal. Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure if council's received any feedback or has any particular input around any of these ones. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
The feedback I've received so far, I think most people believe that these are important changes and that they make sense. Some of the folks that I've talked to so far think it makes sense to make owners be responsible and not necessarily include a maximum number. And I know that our staff didn't propose that, and I can see why they didn't. I would agree with that. From my view, I don't think it makes sense to expand the bylaw to establish restricted areas. I think when you have a dangerous or a fierce dog, in that case, prohibiting them from, big events and things like staff have proposed in this bylaw makes sense. So that all makes sense to me. I personally am not a fan of expanding it to all pets. I think this makes sense to keep it a dog bylaw. The one concern that I do have that we went over earlier just was if you do have a dangerous dog, I am concerned that you could let the dog out in your yard if it's not a fenced-in area, and not have to supervise it in the middle of the night, I think was the example that was used, as opposed to if you have the fierce dog, you can't do that, you need to be with it. So that one does concern me, because if you have a dog that has attempted to bite someone, and we've labeled it dangerous, and then you could let it out in your yard in an urban area where kids are biking by and there's lots of activity going on, you're near schools, wherever. I'm just thinking where I live personally. It could be a young dog, it could be a new dog that someone's adopted. It's shown that it has some aggression. We've labeled it dangerous, but we're saying in this bylaw that it could be in the yard unattended if it's not fenced, etc. So that one concerns me, because I think, if it's shown aggression once, it could have been a one-off incident. Of course, we don't know all the circumstances, But I think just putting a little bit more provisions around that when that dog has been labeled potentially dangerous, that you can't just leave it in your yard unattended, because it could very easily exit your yard and chase after someone or another pet. So I really appreciate all the work for this bylaw. That's one thing that is just making me a little uncomfortable. Thank you.
Any other input? Any other feedback, council? I'll thank the staff for their wisdom in thinking that this should be a standalone special meeting of council as opposed to embedding this in a regular meeting of council's agenda. So I think it's good to give it the space and attention that it deserves. Anything further? Go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to expand on two of the questions for council on there. The one being about restricted areas. That is a two-pronged. It's a restricted, but it can also be an unrestricted area. And the example I'll use for that is Point Pleasant Park in Halifax. They have off-leash hours in Point Pleasant Park. It's earlier in the day. And then they also have dog-restricted zones. And the reason behind that, and kind of as we've talked about today, is for some people that love dogs. There's some people that are terrified of them. And providing that safe space in both lenses can certainly be under the restricted area, and it doesn't necessarily, when establishing restricted areas, we're not necessarily talking about dogs that have only been designated. We're talking about all dogs. So it could be, just as an example, similar to what HRM does, between the hours of 7 and 8 in the morning and 7 and 8 at night, Pine Grove Park is off-leash area for dogs. That could be a consideration that you wanted to do. And in return to that, you could say between the hours of 6 and 7, where I probably wouldn't go back to back, but between the hours of, for point of example here, between 6 and 7 and say 9 and 10, dogs are restricted in the park. So it's kind of, that's one thing council could wish to do. Some jurisdictions do it. I mean, to be honest, it's primarily cities. It's primarily a city thing, and one of the reasonings for that is in the city, there's not as much space for your dog to run. And that you could also look at that from the beaches. So the example that the deputy mayor used about the extended leashes, that's another example there that it could be used. And then just to the age restriction, minimum age. So in the bylaw currently, we label that an owner/guardian must be of 18 years of age, or competent person must be of 18 years of age. We're just wondering how council felt about that age restriction, because to kind of Councillor Fancy's point a little bit earlier, about the little girl walking her dog, and again, it comes down to if nothing ever happens, it's not an issue, but if something does happen, then there are issues at play. And do we want to even look at putting ages into that definition of competent person or into the owner guardian? Because competent person could be a kid, but it also could be a senior as well, or any person. There's no age defining for that. Somebody that's 90 pounds with a 120-pound dog that can pull them, is that competently controlling that dog? And that's what it comes down to.
Just a quick question on beaches. Do our bylaw officers have jurisdiction over all beaches, or is that just Beach Meadows?
We only have jurisdiction on Beach Meadows in Queens County. The other beaches are provincial enforced, so the RCMP, even with parking. So Beach Meadows.
I just wanted to ask you folks, I know a lot of it's great to modernize the bylaw to 2007. It's well out of date, but I know significant amount of the sort of business case or driving force in modernizing the bylaw was that that you folks in bylaw enforcement really didn't have a toolkit available to you to intervene effectively in situations. So I just wanted to provide you with the opportunity that the draft bylaw as it stands now, does this feel right? Is it striking the balance from what you see is enabling you or providing you, if it were to pass in its current iteration, to conduct your duties effectively?
Thanks for asking. Absolutely. This has been a long time coming, and everybody says, pardon the pun, but this gives us more teeth. It gives us more tools in the toolbox. We don't have to go right to a fine necessarily, depending on the circumstance, of course, but there's a lot of layers in between, especially when we're talking end game. If, we're talking euthanasia, we don't want to go there unless it's the last resort, obviously. This proposal for the draft, for the current, the new bylaw, is going to have so many more layers in there, so many more. It fills the gaps for not only us, the region, but the owner, which is, the goal from my perspective. Chris is just getting here, but he has a lot of experience, so I'm not sure if he wants to weigh in or not yet.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, for asking. It's nice. We had sat down with Director McLeod and Mr. Wilson and discussed the bylaw as well, and we found it, like, I'm new to this for the old bylaw, but I found that it does give us a lot of, no pun intended, teeth to work with to help the residents and effectively do our job. So I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, and welcome to the team here at Region of Queens Municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Pleased to have you. Any further comments, input at this time? I do encourage any and all residents to reach out to their councillor or me as the mayor. Let us know what your feedback is. If you think that we've missed the mark in any way, or staff has missed the mark in any way in drafting of the of a modernized bylaw for our consideration, it's an important part of the public policy process to hear from you, and so that's going to be important. With special meetings of council, typically because we know that they're going to be pretty weighty, we don't include public comments. That's sort of just by design, and to make sure that the meeting moves forward in a timely way. But that isn't in any way to discourage engagement and contributions from the public. So please do reach out to the member of council and let us know what you think. And do so in a timely way, because we are going to try to get our feedback back to the staff so that we can move this important piece of work along. Any final thoughts from members of council, staff? No? Hearing, seeing none, I will adjourn the meeting at 2:15. Thank you all very much.